Usually when you win a game, there's this defined boundary, right? Like a line between the competition and reality.
Right, the whistle blows, the buzzer sounds.
Exactly. Somebody takes home the trophy and everyone just goes back to their normal lives. The game is over.
You pack up the board.
Yeah. But imagine a victory so absolute, so all-consuming, that the game doesn't just end. It actually eats the real world. Today is Sunday, April 5, 2026, and we're unpacking the architectural blueprint of that exact scenario. Welcome to a custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you into a really profoundly controversial framework, Alexander Dugin's The Fourth Political Theory.
And we are looking at a deeply provocative, highly dense text today. I mean, our mission here isn't to get bogged down in impenetrable academic jargon. We really want to extract the core mechanisms of a worldview that fundamentally rejects the modern global status quo.
But a quick and really crucial caveat before we open this particular Pandora's box. We are analyzing highly politically charged, deeply anti-Western source material.
Very much so.
And our goal isn't to endorse or condemn this worldview. Neither of us is taking a side here, left, right, or center. We are simply mapping out the architecture of these arguments impartially, just so you can understand the mindset driving them for yourself.
Right, treating this as an exercise in mapping an ideological landscape. And to do that, we have to start in the graveyard of 20th century ideologies. Dugin's foundational premise is that the last century was essentially a bloody apocalyptic cage match between three major political theories.
The big three.
The big three. You had liberalism, which focused on the individual, communism, focusing on class, and fascism, focusing on the state or race.
And as anyone who knows basic 20th century history understands, that wasn't just a polite philosophical debate.
No, not at all.
It was a kinetic war that literally redrew the map of the world. But the outcome of that war is where Dugin's analysis makes this massive paradigm shift.
Yeah, because fascism was destroyed in a suicidal geopolitical war of its own making. And communism didn't really die in battle. It basically succumbed to internal decay and decrepitude. So liberalism defeated all its rivals. It won the 20th century.
Okay, let's unpack this, because winning in this context fundamentally changed the nature of the victor.
Absolutely.
It's like winning a game of Monopoly so completely that the cardboard board dissolves, and passing go to collect $200 becomes a literal law of physics.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't just playing Monopoly anymore. You are trapped in a reality where the rules of the game just govern gravity. When liberalism became the only game in town, it ceased to be a mere political choice. It mutated into this inescapable global reality, which the text calls post-liberalism.
And because it operates like a law of physics now, it's no longer viewed as an ideology, it's just reality. In this post-liberal world, the individual is no longer a political subject you can choose to champion. It's a mandatory given.
You're just born into it.
Right. You are freed from all collective identity, religion, nation, class. But you are simultaneously reduced to a pure consumer. Economics entirely replaces politics.
Alain de Benoit's concept of governance really comes to mind here.
Oh, yeah.
The idea is that grand political decisions, like questions about the ultimate good or the direction of society, they're entirely gone. Technocrats and managers have just replaced politicians.
We aren't debating the soul of a nation anymore.
Exactly. We're just, tweaking the interest rates and arguing over supply chain logistics.
Which introduces the core tension we are exploring today. Because if liberalism is dissolved into the very air we breathe, fighting it feels structurally impossible. You can't protest the concept of gravity.
Right. You can't fight air.
You cannot simply build a new political party to oppose an operating system that defines what politics even is.
If you want to rebel against an operating system, you can't just write a new app. You need an entirely new architectural foundation. And this leads directly to Dugin's search for a fourth political theory.
The 4PT.
Right. If the first three theories are either dead or have mutated into the atmosphere of global capitalism, he argues the world desperately needs a completely new paradigm. But, and this is a big but, every political ideology needs a historical subject, like an actor.
Someone driving the bus.
Yeah, liberalism had the individual, communism had the class, fascism had the state. If this new theory rejects all of those, who is the subject? Who is the actor?
Well, to find a subject outside of modern politics, Dugin reaches outside of modern politics entirely. He pulls from the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, specifically his concept of Dasein.
Okay, let's unpack this carefully because Dasein translates roughly to being there or human existence in its deepest, most authentic sense.
Right.
And the source material ties this closely to the ethnos, the organic cultural community. But I have to push back hard here.
Sure.
How do you build a functional political system around an abstract philosophical concept like Dasein? I mean, how does Dasein manage a power grid? How does authentic being collect taxes?
Well, the text would argue you're applying a liberal technocratic metric to a theory that fundamentally rejects technocracy. The fourth political theory argues that asking, how does Dasein collect taxes is completely missing the point. Obsessing over hyper-managerial logistics is the exact trap of postmodernity.
Oh, interesting. So it's rejecting the premise of the question.
Exactly. The goal of this theory isn't bureaucratic mechanics. The goal is reclaiming authentic human existence from the mechanisms of control that currently pacify us.
Reclaiming it from what he calls the cheerful doll.
Yes, the mindless, anesthetized consumer. The argument is that postmodern liberalism has alienated human existence by replacing civic and spiritual identity with algorithmic distraction.
Like channel surfing or just doom scrolling.
Right. We've put a fake, easily distracted spectator in the place of authentic human depth. When Dasein is the political subject, it means the entire societal structure must be oriented around freeing humans to experience the profound truth of being, rather than just scrolling on a screen to stave off existential boredom.
So it's treating the human not as an isolated economic unit optimizing its shopping cart, but as an entity deeply organically rooted in its specific culture, its ethnos.
Exactly.
But to actually build a world around that, the source material argues you have to first tear out a toxic foundation that the previous three theories all silently agreed upon.
The myth of linear progress. The unwavering belief that history is a one-way street, constantly moving from a primitive past to an enlightened future.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Dugin makes this incredibly provocative claim. He says the idea of progress is inherently racist.
Yeah, it's a jarring phrase. But the underlying logic relies on temporal chauvinism. The concept of linear progress automatically assumes the present is morally and technologically superior to the past.
Right. It assumes that an industrialized modern person is fundamentally better than an ancient traditional person.
Exactly.
The source material actually calls this a moral genocide against our ancestors. By worshiping progress, we retroactively treat everyone who came before us as inferior, like defective early drafts of modern humans.
And this mechanism extends directly to how we treat contemporary cultures today, too.
Oh, right.
If you genuinely believe your society is the most advanced on that linear timeline, you automatically view societies that don't share your economic system or your technological obsession as backward or savage or in desperate need of modernization.
And modernization often functions as a highly sanitized word for colonization.
Precisely.
What's fascinating here is how the framework leverages science to dismantle this.
Yeah, it brings in Gregory Bateson. He was an American scientist who studied what he called monotonic processes.
Okay, monotonic processes, meaning a process that only ever grows in one direction.
Exactly. It just accumulates up and up forever. In biology, monotonic growth is lethal. A biological process that refuses to cycle back, that only exhibits endless, unchecked growth, is a cancer.
Wow.
It eventually kills the host. Life relies on cycles, feedback loops, balance, return. Endless one-dimensional growth is mathematically incompatible with a living system.
The mechanical analogy used in the text makes this so clear. Think of an early steam engine. If you just feed it coal and let it accelerate endlessly, like a pure monotonic process, it will literally shake itself apart and explode.
Right, it destroys itself.
You must install a centrifugal governor. You need a mechanical feedback loop that limits the growth, regulates the intake, and forces the energy into a stable cycle.
And applying that to society, infinite technological and economic accumulation without a cultural governor to regulate it leads to societal death.
This maps perfectly onto the sociological research of Marcel Mauss. The text highlights him. He studied ancient traditional societies and realized they were absolutely terrified of endless accumulation.
They saw it as dangerous.
Totally. They didn't view surplus wealth as a blessing to be invested for compound interest. They viewed it as a toxin that could destroy the social fabric, so they practiced the potlatch.
The ritual destruction of surplus.
Yeah, they threw these massive sheaths, gave everything away, or literally burned their excess wealth in a fire.
Just to get rid of it.
Right. They purposefully instituted a mechanism to prevent a monotonic process. They hit the reset button to maintain cyclical balance because they understood a biological truth that modern global economics just refuses to accept, which is that infinite growth kills the host.
And shattering that illusion of a single, unidirectional timeline of progress, well, it radically changes the geopolitical map today. If time doesn't just march forward toward one ultimate liberal utopia, then time and history become reversible.
History isn't a train track, it's a pendulum.
The current geopolitical friction we see every day is fundamentally a clash over the nature of time and history. The U.S. and the broader West generally operate on Francis Fukuyama's concept of the end of history.
The idea that Western liberal democracy is the final evolutionary destination.
Exactly. The assumption is every nation on Earth is traveling on the exact same timeline. And anyone who hasn't reached liberal democracy yet is simply lagging behind on that unipolar track.
But if time is reversible and progress is a destructive myth, there is no single destination. Dugin counters that unipolar model with a multipolar world order. He adapts Samuel Huntington's idea of distinct civilizational blocks.
Right, instead of forcing every nation to conform to one global American standard, the world should be understood as distinct great spaces or civilizations.
So you'd have like a Eurasian civilization, an Islamic civilization, a Chinese civilization.
Multiple heavens, multiple centers of power, each operating on their own distinct philosophical and temporal foundations.
But I have to ask, if we carve the world into deeply distinct civilizational blocks, doesn't that guarantee endless war? Doesn't creating massive, isolated regional hegemons literally invite the clash of civilizations that Huntington warned us about?
Well, the fourth political theory anticipates that exact critique. It flips the blame, actually. It argues that endless war is generated by unipolarity.
Oh, by one side trying to dominate.
Right. By one dominant civilization trying to force its specific operating system onto everyone else, usually under the banner of universal human rights or globalization. The alternative proposed here is pluriversalism.
Pluriversalism, meaning there isn't just one universe of values, but many parallel universes coexisting.
Exactly. Dialogue and coexistence become possible specifically because no single civilization is trying to drag the others to the so-called end of history. A multipolar world neutralizes the cultural racism of globalism.
It provides a mechanism for different societies to exist in their own rhythm.
Right, maintaining their own definitions of the sacred without being economically or militarily punished by a global financial center just for being quote-unquote backward.
Okay, so if this global liberal empire is as pervasive and totalizing as the text claims, if it really is the inescapable operating system of reality, who is actually managing to resist it on the ground today?
That's the big question.
Because looking globally, the people who hate the modern world certainly do not agree on how to fight it.
No, they don't. The text categorizes the resistance against postmodernity into four distinct phases of conservatism. And these aren't just subtle disagreements. They represent entirely different strategies of rebellion.
Let's contrast these, starting with the two most common. You have traditionalism on one extreme and liberal conservatism on the other.
Right.
Traditionalists aren't just critiquing tax rates, they're attempting to rewind the clock entirely. They employ a complete refusal to play the modern game.
We retreat to the archaic.
Exactly. The source material gives this vivid example of Russian old believers retreating to the woods and banning coffee because they consider it an unholy modern invention, or Islamic fundamentalists attempting to recreate ancient caliphates.
Now, liberal conservatism is entirely different. This is your standard mainstream status quo conservatism.
Right.
They don't want to stop the engine of modern progress. They just want to install speed limits because the car is shaking. They fundamentally agree with the liberal economic trajectory, but they are terrified of the cultural and postmodern chaos it generates.
They want the free market to keep humming, but they want to enforce social order to keep things stable.
Exactly.
Then you get into the much weirder territory. The third phase is left-wing conservatism. It sounds completely paradoxical, but the mechanism makes sense when you look at movements like National Bolshevism.
Oh, right.
They take hardline, socialist, anti-capitalist economics, but instead of coupling it with progressive social values, they fuse it with deep, archaic, national myths. They use left-wing economic critique to fight global capitalism, but fuel it with hyper-traditional, almost mystical nationalist energy.
Which brings us to the fourth phase, the one that deeply informs the fourth political theory itself, the conservative revolution.
The accelerationists.
Yeah, the most radical group. They view the modern world as carrying a fatal systemic disease. You can't cure it by hiding in the woods like the traditionalists, and you certainly can't cure it by lightly tapping the brakes like the liberal conservatives.
Right.
The conservative revolutionaries believe the only way out is through. You have to push the toxic system to its absolute limit, expose the root rot at its foundation, and force it to collapse under its own weight, destroy it from the inside out.
They want to feed the steam engine so much coal that it shatters.
They want to let the absurdity of postmodernity play itself out until the illusion breaks entirely.
And the absurdity of postmodernity is a crucial mechanism here, specifically how the global empire manages to absorb its enemies.
It absorbs everything.
It really does. The text points to the incredibly dark humor of Che Guevara's legacy. I mean, here is a man who operated as the ultimate symbol of visceral, violent, anti-capitalist revolution.
Right, a literal guerrilla fighter.
And what is his function today? He is a simulacrum. He's a mass-produced image plastered on a billboard to sell cell phones, or printed on a $50 t-shirt worn by wealthy teenagers.
Postmodernism neutralizes ideological threats through commodification. It strips the violent reality from the ideology and turns it into a purely aesthetic lifestyle brand.
Yeah.
The rebellion just becomes a product you buy within the very system you claim to hate.
Wow.
The conservative revolutionaries recognize this society of the spectacle, this endless anesthetizing loop of ironic detachment. And they realize you cannot fight a simulacrum with standard political debate.
So what does this all mean for you? Why dive into the dense philosophical weeds of Heideggerian existentialism, monotonic cybernetics, and civilizational pluriversalism?
Because regardless of whether you find these ideas brilliant or horrifying, this material functions as a critical decoder ring.
Yeah. Grasping the tectonic shifts in global geopolitics requires understanding the philosophy driving the friction. When you see massive resistance movements in the Middle East, or the rise of fiercely traditional socialist movements in South America, or the aggressive civilizational rhetoric emanating from Eurasia, it can look like a series of disconnected, chaotic outbursts.
If you're only wearing Western liberal lenses, that is.
Exactly. But apply this framework as a decoder ring, and you instantly comprehend the architecture of the global pushback. It is a philosophically unified rejection of the liberal end of history.
These disparate actors are effectively saying, your timeline is not our timeline. Your operating system is not our reality.
It reveals why deeply diverse and frankly contradictory forces are aligning on the global stage. They are uniting not around a shared positive vision of the future, but around a shared negative. The desperate rejection of Western hegemony and a unipolar post-liberal empire.
Right.
Which leaves us with a final, really haunting metaphor from the text that I want you to sit with. The author illustrates where this philosophical friction might ultimately culminate by pointing to the tragic Russian theater hostage crisis at Nordost.
Yeah, that is a dark example. In that event, heavily armed terrorists physically stormed a theater in Moscow while a performance was actively happening on stage.
And the chilling detail the text highlights is the audience's initial reaction. Because we live in this hyper-ironic postmodern society of the spectacle, where everything feels like a performance and genuine reality is heavily mediated by screens and the internet.
When the armed men charged the stage, the audience didn't panic. They didn't run.
They thought it was part of an avant-garde immersive theater experience. They genuinely assumed the men with guns were just the next act in the postmodern play.
The illusion held perfectly, right up until the visceral reality of the violence shattered the spectacle entirely.
As you go about your day, I want you to mull this over. As our world plunges deeper into a highly fragmented, irony-soaked society of endless digital spectacle, what if this postmodern era isn't a permanent condition?
What if the ultimate rebellion against the modern world won't be a polite philosophical debate over tax brackets?
Or a peaceful shift in policy? What if it manifests as a sudden, visceral resurgence of ancient, archaic realities violently crashing the stage?
A singular moment that instantly ends the illusion of the postmodern game.
Ask yourself, is the digital, irony-soaked world you inhabit actually as secure as you think it is? Or are we all just sitting comfortably in the theater waiting for the real world to suddenly and violently break the script?